You'll soon be cutting less and quilting more. Hello, I'm Deborah Rubles. I live in Lebanon, Missouri. I'm the author of The Quilter's Cutting Guide, A Sliding Ruler Method. This is a book that I published in May of 2017. And if you follow the instructions and technique in this book, you'll soon be cutting less and quilting more. Today's cutting snippet is going to be about cutting out pieces of fabric for one single block. And the reason I wanted to show this is because it's the same techniques that I promote and that are illustrated in the book, but it's working with smaller pieces of fabric. So I participate in several block of the months, and this is one that I'm participating in, and I'm going to make that particular block. Now, that block, what I've done is I've already labeled the fabric, the pieces of fabric. I've labeled it by following the instructions on the block, on the pattern, and writing each piece of fabric has the cutting instructions on it of what I'm going to cut. So there's a piece of dark fabric, there's a medium fabric, and then there's a piece of white fabric. So 3 pieces that I have to cut out to make that block. Now, so what I'll do is I'll lay them over here, and I'll start with the first one. And the cutting instructions on a post-it, and I'll just stick it under the cutting mat so I can see it. With this piece of fabric, I have to cut 2 3.5-inch squares. Now what I wanted to show you is that whenever I start cutting, the first thing I usually do is fold it in half if I can. Because whenever you fold it in half, that fold is a straight edge, which means that's one less cut that you may have to make. So I'm folding it in half, and I'm going to square it, and I square using 2 ruler method, which is explained in chapter 2 of my book. And I square it, cut, and then I'm going to cut me a 3.5-inch strip. I want 2 3.5-inch blocks. Okay, so it's 3.5. Now I'm going to turn the fabric. I'm going to keep it folded because these are both going to be 3.5. I am going to square the fabric with the 2 rulers again, like so. And then I'm going to cut a 3.5-inch strip. So I just cut my 2 3.5-inch blocks, probably in about half the steps of other ways of cutting, by keeping it folded in half. That's one of the things I wanted to show you. Now we'll do the same thing on these other pieces. This one asks for a 9-inch square. So we have this piece of fabric, and I have to cut a 9-inch square out of it. First thing I do is I'm not going to try to square up all 4. I'm going to fold it in half again, square the left side, hold the ruler, and then just bring this ruler over and cut a 9-inch strip. And then what I'll do is turn this around, keeping it folded like so, and then I'm going to cut it in half. So I'm cutting, I want a 9-inch block, half of 9 inches, 4.5. So I'm going to put the 4.5 on that fold. So again, I'm doing less steps and less cuts. There's my 9-inch block. Okay, and the last piece that we're going to cut is this white strip, and it wants 6 3.5-inch squares and 1 7.5-inch block. So what I'll start with is probably, yes I will, is cut a 7.5-inch block first, because you always want to cut your biggest, the majority of the time you want to cut the largest measurement first. So I'm going to cut a 7.5, and I'm just going to rough cut a piece, and I make sure that it's more than 7.5. So now fold it in half like it did on those other ones, square the left side, bring your ruler over, cut a 7.5-inch strip here. Now, I will have to admit, 7.5 divided by 2 is not so easy. I'd have to get my calculator out though. So what I'll do is, I'm just going to turn that one, and I will actually fold it again and do the same thing. Or, just leave it. We know that these edges are square. You have two options. You can just go ahead. I'm going to use this bottom line because I know it was square. And I'm going to square up the left edge. Like so. And then bring my ruler over and cut 7.5. So there's my 7.5 inch piece. Now, I did go into the salvage edge a little bit. So you have to be careful and make sure that you don't get into the salvage edge. I should have moved it over a little bit more, but that'd be okay. The last thing we need is 6 3.5 inch pieces. So this material is approximately 8 inches wide. So I'm going to cut 2 3.5 inch strips. The first thing I do is fold it in half. We're going to square the left edge. And you see by squaring with the two rulers how you don't have to pick up any fabric and move it around. You're not moving the cutting mats around, and you're not walking around the table. You're just simply cutting and you're done. And I'm bringing the ruler over now. We went 3.5, so I'm going to cut 7. No, let's go to the book. This is in your Quilter's Cutting Guide. You can go to the 3-inch tab, and then you could turn the pages till you find 3 1/2. Now, for those of you who like to do math, you've already done the math in your head. You know that 3.5 and 3.5 is 7, but in case you don't, this is the number of strips needed. We need 2 strips that are 3.5 inches wide, so you go down and find 2. You go across, and it says cut on 7 inches. So on the big ruler, you find that 7, and you line it up on that straight edge that I just cut. So I'm cutting, I've lined it up, and then you cut. Then you simply move your ruler over to that last number, which is 3.5. So move it over to 3.5 and cut. So now we have 2 strips that are 3.5 inches wide. Remember, what we need is 6 3.5 inch squares. So what I would do is that I would actually open these up, line them up on a line in the cutting mat, and I'm going to stack them because I want to get my cutting done, get it done fast and accurately, so that I can go sew. So I'm squaring up the fabric again on the left. And now we need 2, 4, 6. We need 6 3.5. So we're going to make 3 cuts, or 3 strips. So if you look at the book, you go down to 3, you go across, cut on 10.5. So you find the 10.5 on your ruler, you line it up on that straight edge. Also line a line up at the bottom of the fabric. Well, I'm on 11.5. Let's get on 10.5. I'm on 10.5 now. Okay, and then cut. And then you move your ruler over to the next number, which is 7. Last number is 3.5, and we just cut our 6 3.5 inch squares. And we're done with the cutting instructions, with cutting out our fabric to make this one block. And that's what, if you follow the instructions and techniques in the Quilter's Cutting Guide, you'll soon be cutting less and quilting more. So that's your cutting snippet today from Deborah Rubles, author of the Quilter's Cutting Guide. You can purchase this book at www.quilterscuttingguide.com. Thank you.